The thick envelope sat in my lap, heavy and ominous, feeling less like a piece of mail and more like a court summons. I was parked in the driveway of my grandmother's house in a quiet, sun-drenched town in Georgia, my engine killed. The windows rolled down to let the humid summer air cut through the lingering scent of old upholstery. My grandmother, Eleanor, had placed it in my hands right after dinner, her fingers trembling slightly against the paper edges. "It's time," she had whispered. She didn't say anything else. Eleanor wasn't the type to waste words on things that didn't demand them. I turned the envelope over, seeing my name written in her meticulous flowing script. When I broke the seal and pulled out the first page, my breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't from a sudden shock of surprise, but from a sickening flash of recognition. It was as if a jagged, invisible puzzle piece I had been carrying in my chest for 22 years had finally clicked into place. The path I took with the contents of that envelope over the next 5 years would eventually dismantle my family's foundation, cost my uncle his standing in the community, ruin my aunt's carefully curated reputation, and leave my cousin's high society engagement party in total shambles. But it all started right here, in a beat-up 12-year-old sedan on my 25th birthday, with a canceled check for medical braces that I had never actually received. Welcome back to Hidden Family Secrets. I'm Maya, and today I'm 30 years old. This is the story of how a single letter from my grandmother exposed over 2 decades of calculated deception, and a staggering $355,000 gap between what my family billed her for my care and what they actually spent on me. If you have ever been treated like an outsider at your own family's dinner table, you need to hear this. Before we dive into the wreckage, please take a second to hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We upload deep-dive investigative stories like this every week, uncovering the truth behind family betrayals and corporate scandals. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. So settle in, grab a coffee, and let's get into the heart of the betrayal. My mother, Sarah, died in a tragic single-vehicle accident on a highway just outside of a small city in rural Georgia when I was only 3 years old. She was 25 at the time, the exact age I was when I finally opened that envelope. I hadn't realized the symmetry of the timing until years later, but it felt like a ghost was handing me the torch. Sarah had been Eleanor's youngest daughter, the one the family always described as having the loudest laugh and a dangerous habit of driving too fast. After the funeral, Eleanor had desperately wanted to raise me herself, but at 55, her body was already betraying her. Severe arthritis had begun to warp her hands into stiff, aching shapes that made simple tasks like buttoning a coat feel like a marathon. Arthur, Eleanor's eldest son, swooped in with an offer. He and his wife Claire stepped forward with open arms. "We have the space for her," Arthur had told Eleanor. "Our son Julian could really use a sister." That was the lie that sealed my fate. What Eleanor never heard, and what they kept hidden behind closed doors, was the cold, clinical negotiation that took place the moment she turned her back. Arthur wanted compensation for the inconvenience. While that might sound reasonable on its face, after all, raising a child isn't cheap, his demands were predatory. Eleanor agreed to pay $1,800 a month for my care, covering everything from food and clothing to school supplies, medical costs, and extracurricular activities. She wrote that first check in October of 1999, and never missed a single payment for the next 22 years. That totaled $475,200. I know the exact figure because I eventually sat down and counted every single one of those payments. There was never any legal adoption, no official court filing, and no oversight from a social worker. Arthur and Claire simply shoved a cheap twin bed into the spare room next to Julian's and told the neighbors I was adopted in spirit. That phrase became a cage that followed me through every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's visit, and every holiday dinner where some relative would ask how I fit into the family tree. Adopted in spirit. It sounds almost heartwarming until you realize that in practice, it meant absolutely nothing. I had no legal rights, no claim to an inheritance, and no security, only a bed to sleep in and whatever fleeting scraps of kindness Arthur and Claire felt like tossing my way on any given day. The disparity between Julian's childhood and mine could be measured in the glow of birthday candles. On his 8th birthday, there was a party at a local bowling alley, 12 friends, a massive sheet cake with his name written in blue frosting, and a mountain of presents that took him nearly half an hour to tear through. On my 9th birthday, just 6 weeks later, I woke up to find a single plain cupcake sitting on the kitchen table at 7 in the morning. There was no candle, no ribbon, no wrapping paper, and certainly no friends. Claire was loading the dishwasher when I walked in, her back turned to me. "Happy birthday," she said, her voice completely flat, the way someone might tell a stranger to have a safe trip at a gas station. When I asked if we could maybe have a small get-together, she dried her hands on a rag and gave me a look I would grow to know well over the next 13 years. The look that told me I was being selfish and unreasonable for wanting a normal life. "We can only afford to celebrate one of you this month," she said. "Julian's travel baseball league registration fee is due." That phrase, "we can only celebrate one," became the unofficial motto of my entire life. One set of school photos, one kid allowed to go to the orthodontist, one college fund. Everything was always for Julian. I learned quickly to stop asking for things. I learned to nod, clear my plate, and say a polite thank you for the pathetic little cupcake. Arthur reinforced the hierarchy in his own way. When I was 10, I was sitting on the back porch while Julian played inside on a brand new gaming console. I dared to ask Arthur why the rules were always so different for me. He set his beer down on the railing and looked at me with the same cold, detached indifference you'd use for a stray dog that had wandered into your yard. "You're family in spirit, not on paper," he said, his voice hard. "And that means the rules are different." I didn't cry. I didn't have the luxury of it. I just nodded, went inside, washed my dish, and started my homework. I was 10 years old and already keeping a mental ledger of every slight, every missed opportunity, and every dollar that seemed to vanish into thin air. By the time I was 14, I was working at Arthur's flooring warehouse on the highway, sweeping the concrete floors, organizing heavy sample books, and answering the phones on Saturdays while Julian slept until noon. I never saw a dime of a paycheck. Arthur called it contributing to the household, and Claire called it learning responsibility. Julian, of course, called it nothing, because he was never asked to contribute a single hour of his life to anything. I never complained. Complaining in that house was like dumping gasoline on a fire. It only made everything louder, more aggressive, and more miserable. So I just worked. I spent my teenage summers stocking heavy rolls of carpet in the warehouse during heat waves that felt like they would melt the very skin off my back. I organized invoices in a filing system so chaotic and disorganized that it took me 3 weeks just to alphabetize the mess. And somewhere in the middle of those rusting filing cabinets, buried between the vendor receipts and the tax returns that Arthur never let me see, I started to understand the language of numbers. I began to realize that numbers tell a very clear story, especially when someone is trying desperately to keep you from reading them. After graduating from high school, I enrolled at a local state college, pursuing an associate's degree in accounting. I paid every cent of my own tuition, a total of $9,600 over 2 years, earned by working a grinding part-time job at a tax preparation office located down on the main highway. Arthur and Claire didn't even bother to attend my graduation. Julian was at a fraternity party at a major university that weekend, and Claire told me they couldn't possibly split the family in 2 directions. One direction, always just the one. I walked across that stage in a cheap rented gown, accepted my diploma, and drove myself home in total silence. I moved out the moment I turned 22, finding a small, drafty 1-bedroom apartment situated above a noisy laundromat. Cost $700 a month, but it was mine. I landed a solid job as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized construction company, bringing in $42,000 a year. It was enough. For the first time in my existence, no one else held the ledger. Throughout all of this, Eleanor remained the one constant. Every Sunday, I drove 20 minutes to her modest home on a quiet lane. It was a 3-bedroom house set on 1.5 acres, with white siding, faded green shutters, and a porch swing that groaned like it was exhausted. She always had a peach cobbler waiting for me, my mother's secret recipe. She used canned peaches instead of fresh ones because, as my mother used to say, the syrup gave the crust a much richer texture, and Eleanor never changed a single ingredient after the funeral. We would sit on that porch, eating the cobbler while it was still warm, accompanied by vanilla ice cream that always melted into a soup before we could finish a single sentence. Eleanor called me my girl. And she didn't say it in a sugary, sentimental way. She said it as a matter of fact, the same way she would say my house or my garden. I belonged to her and she made sure I knew it. That house was worth roughly $240,000. Eleanor was 82 now, and her pace was slowing. Her arthritis had migrated from her hands to her knees, forcing her to rely on a walker most days, but her mind remained a steel trap. She remembered every birthday, every check she sent, and every hollow promise anyone had ever made to her. One Sunday, I arrived a bit early and overheard Claire on the phone in Eleanor's kitchen. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. "When the old woman finally passes," Claire said, her tone dripping with casual, predatory confidence, "we're going to knock out that back wall and completely open up the kitchen. The land alone is worth way more than the house." She was talking about Eleanor's home, about the very sanctuary that had kept me sane for years, like it was already a piece of property in her possession. Eleanor was in the next room, happily watching a game show. I stood frozen in that hallway for 10 long seconds, etching the cold, proprietary sound of Claire's voice into my memory. Then I smoothed my expression, walked in, and said hello as if I hadn't heard a single word. I was 23, and I was learning the art of patience. I need to explain exactly what $1,800 a month bought Arthur and Claire, because it certainly wasn't me. Arthur bought a professional-grade bass boat the year I turned 16, a $28,000 beast with a fiberglass hull and high-end fish-finding technology. He kept it at a secure storage lot and used it maybe 4 times a year. When I was 19, Claire decided to remodel their kitchen. That cost them $35,000, featuring granite countertops, top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances, and a massive farmhouse sink she'd obsessed over on home improvement shows. Meanwhile, the carpet business Arthur owned was clearly failing. The big-box retailers were systematically destroying his margins. He kept the lights on, but the showroom was essentially a hollow shell by the time I walked away. Julian's tuition at the university ended up costing $82,000 over 4 years. Arthur and Claire paid every dime. Julian graduated with a business degree, a brand new truck, and absolutely zero student debt. I walked away with an associate's degree and a manila folder filled with receipts for the $9,000 I had scraped together myself, because that's what bookkeepers do. Thanksgiving was always the annual reminder of my place. Every year, I arrived early to help Claire prepare. I ironed the tablecloths, polished the silverware, and arranged the centerpiece. Then, as soon as dinner was served, Claire would gesture toward the folding card table in the kitchen, the one with the shaky leg that was wedged awkwardly between the refrigerator and the pantry. "Adults at the dining table," she would announce, even after I turned 20. Even after I was paying my own rent, taxes, and bills. I sat at that card table year after year, eating turkey and sweet tea while watching through the doorway as Arthur carved the bird. Claire refilled wine glasses, and Julian held court with stories about his college life. Afterward, I cleaned up the entire kitchen. No one asked me to, and no one ever thanked me. My 25th birthday fell on a Thursday. Not a single person in that house mentioned it. No text, no call, no cupcake. I worked a full shift, finished reconciling 3 complex accounts, ate a sad sandwich at my desk, and drove to Eleanor's house. She had a lemon pound cake waiting with white icing and my name written in her trembling downward-sloping script. She told me to make a wish, and I blew out the candle. After we finished eating, she took my arm and guided me to her bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled a thick, legal-sized manila envelope from her nightstand. "It's time," she said. Her voice was thin, but it carried the weight of steel. "Don't open this inside the house," she warned. "Take it to your car. Read it alone." She pressed the envelope into my hands, and I felt the warmth of her fingers. "Your mama would have given this to you herself," she whispered. "But she's gone. So I'm the one doing it." I walked out the front door, down the porch steps, and across the gravel driveway. The evening air was cooling, but my skin felt electric. I climbed into my sedan, locked the doors, and sat in the dark. The porch light illuminated the driveway, and I knew Eleanor was watching from behind the curtains, waiting for me to engage with the truth. I opened the envelope under the dim dome light. My hands were perfectly steady, the way they always become when I am knee-deep in a spreadsheet, and the numbers are finally beginning to peel back the layers of a lie. Inside was a stack of documents clipped together in sections. The first page was a legal trust document, the Eleanor V. Sterling Irrevocable Trust, established on March 14, 2001. My heart stopped. I was 3 years old in 2001, the same year my mother died. Eleanor had set this up immediately, a silent fortress to protect my future from the very beginning. The sole beneficiary listed on the second page was my full legal name. The trust held $180,000 in a professionally managed account, along with the full deed to Eleanor's house. It was set to vest entirely when I turned 30. The trustee was a man named Harold Finch, a retired attorney from a neighboring county whom I had never met. Beneath the legal documents was a letter in Eleanor's hand, spanning 3 pages. Maya, she had written, I have been paying your uncle $1,800 every month since 1999. He told me it was for your education, your clothing, your medical needs, and your extracurricular activities. I believed him for a very long time, but I don't anymore. Please check the numbers. I think they've been robbing you blind. You are the only person in this family who knows how to read a ledger. So read it. I sat in that car for nearly an hour. The total amount Eleanor had paid them was $475,000. As a professional bookkeeper, I knew that money didn't just vanish, it leaves a trail. If you are enjoying this deep dive into how I finally took back my life and exposed these people, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We are just getting into the most intense part of the investigation, and you won't want to miss the fallout. Click that bell icon so you stay updated on the next part of this saga. The next morning I began the audit. Bookkeeping is essentially patience disguised as math. You don't look for fraud. You look for anomalies. And fraud always reveals itself the moment the patterns break. I contacted Harold Finch, who provided me with copies of every check Eleanor had written to Arthur, every itemized list Arthur had submitted, and every bank statement from the trust. There were 264 individual line items over 22 years. I built a massive spreadsheet. Column A was what they billed Eleanor for. Column B was the reality of what actually occurred. Column C was the massive gaping difference. The findings were devastating. Arthur had billed Eleanor $800 a month for private school tuition for a decade. I had attended a standard public high school for free. He had billed her for extensive orthodontic work, braces I never wore. He had charged her for elite summer camps that didn't even exist. Most damning, he had billed her $500 a month for a college savings account that was never opened. My eyes scanned the rows, the numbers confirming what I had felt in my gut since I was a child. They hadn't just skimmed off the top. They had used me as a financial conduit. Every month, they used my name to justify thousands of dollars that were actually funding Julian's private school, his lifestyle, and his future. The private school, Lie, was the first one I completely dismantled. They had collected $96,000 in my name for Westside Academy. I checked the records. I had never once stepped foot in that building. Julian, however, had attended there for 7 years. They had literally used Eleanor's money to pay for their son's education while telling her they were paying for mine. The level of cold-blooded, calculated precision was staggering. They weren't just careless. They were architects of a scheme designed to siphon Eleanor's wealth under the guise of child care. Every dollar was stolen, laundered through the fiction of my upbringing, and spent on their own immediate family. The total gap wasn't just in the tens of thousands, it was hundreds of thousands. And I was only halfway through the first year of my audit.
As I dug deeper into the financial history, the spreadsheets began to reveal a reality more sinister than I had imagined. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the deliberate, systematic effort to minimize my existence while maximizing my utility as a cash cow. The clothing allowance was another blatant fabrication. Arthur had consistently requested $200 a month for essential wardrobe updates. I looked at my old photos from those years. I was perpetually wearing hand-me-down sweaters, frayed jeans, and sneakers held together with duct tape. I had lived in a state of perpetual poverty while they were billing Eleanor for a lifestyle I never saw. By the time I reached the 3-year mark of the audit, the diverted funds column had surpassed $200,000. I realized then that my life at their house hadn't been a charitable act, it had been a business investment for them. They hadn't wanted a daughter, they had wanted a revenue stream. Every time I had been told to be grateful for the shelter they provided, it was a lie meant to keep me quiet. I had been paying for my own room and board through my labor and the very checks they were pocketing. I needed to gather hard evidence before making a move. I started recording conversations. I would visit the house on weekends, feigning a desire to catch up and steer the conversation toward the past. I played the role of the submissive, confused girl they expected. I was looking at some old school records, I told Claire one afternoon, my voice carefully neutral. It's so funny, I couldn't find any of my old tuition statements from West Side Academy. Do you remember where you filed those? Claire didn't even look up from her tablet. Oh, honey, that was so long ago. Arthur probably shredded all that paperwork when we cleaned out the office. It's not like it matters now. Her dismissal was effortless. She had no idea that I was already in possession of the actual records from the school, which showed Julian's name on every single invoice they had claimed was mine. I realized I couldn't just confront them, they would destroy the evidence and gaslight me until I doubted my own sanity. I needed a strategy that would force them into a corner where the math became impossible to ignore. I reached out to an old family friend, a local investigator, and shared the spreadsheet. When he saw the pattern of the forged invoices, he went pale. Maya, he said, this isn't just a family dispute. This is documented wire fraud and embezzlement. You have enough here to ruin them. The plan started to take shape. I wasn't just going to get the money back. I was going to expose the entire ecosystem they had built. I began coordinating with Harold Finch, the trustee. He was ready to execute the legal strategy the moment I gave the signal. But there was one piece of the puzzle I was still missing, the emergency medical fund they had billed for in 2012. It was a staggering $40,000. I had no memory of any medical emergency that year. I spent 2 weeks scouring local hospital records and insurance databases until I found it, a claim for a surgical procedure Julian had undergone that summer. They hadn't even bothered to change the dates or the billing codes. It was the same procedure, the same hospital, the same price, just a different name on the header. I sat in my apartment, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. I had everything. The private school tuition, the fake medical bills, the non-existent college fund, and the systematic theft of my grandmother's support checks. They had built a life of luxury on a foundation of lies, and they had used me as the structural support. If you are following this story, you know that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. This isn't just about reclaiming what was stolen, it's about restoring justice. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel, because in the next part, we are going to see exactly what happened when I walked into that house for the final time with the truth in my bag. The look on their faces when they realized the adopted in spirit girl was holding all the cards. It was priceless. You don't want to miss the fallout. The day of the final confrontation arrived on a Tuesday, perfectly timed to coincide with the date of the annual family dinner that Arthur and Claire insisted upon. I hadn't been invited, but that didn't matter. I showed up at the front door precisely at 7, dressed in a sharp, professional blazer, the kind of attire I wore to my accounting job, not the hand-me-downs they were used to seeing me in. When Arthur opened the door, his eyes narrowed with immediate annoyance. We didn't invite you, Maya. This is a private family dinner. I know, I said, my voice steady and devoid of the fear I used to feel in this entryway. But we have some unfinished business regarding the last 22 years of invoices. I stepped past him before he could protest, walking straight into the kitchen. Julian was already at the table, scrolling through his phone, while Claire was busy plating a roast. When she saw me, her expression shifted from irritation to a cold, hard glare. Maya, you're being incredibly rude, Claire snapped. Get out of my house. Actually, this house is part of a very complicated financial record, I replied, pulling a thick, bound folder from my bag and setting it squarely on the granite countertop, the very countertop that had been paid for with money meant for my clothes and books. I opened it to the first page of the spreadsheet. I've spent the last few months reconciling the accounts. It turns out there's a discrepancy of about $475,000 between the services you billed Eleanor for and the services I actually received. The air in the kitchen vanished. Arthur looked at the folder, then back at me, his face turning a mottled shade of red. You're delusional. You're talking about money that was used to keep this family afloat. No, I corrected him, pulling out the proof of the school tuition fraud. I'm talking about money laundered through my name to pay for Julian's private school and his lifestyle. Here is the receipt for his tuition at Westside Academy, billed under my name, paid for by Eleanor's checks. I laid the papers out one by one. The medical records for Julian's surgery in 2012, the falsified summer camp invoices, the non-existent college fund. It was all there, laid bare on the kitchen island. Julian finally looked up, his phone dropping to his lap. He looked at his father, then at the documents, and his face went pale. Dad? What is she talking about? It's not what it looks like, Arthur stammered, his voice losing its usual authority. He looked around as if seeking an escape, but there was nowhere to go. We did what we had to do. We raised you. We gave you a roof over your head. You gave me a bed in a spare room, I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the tension. And in exchange, you stole my inheritance, you lied to Eleanor, and you treated me like a line item on your tax returns. But that stops today. I reached into my bag and pulled out a letter from Harold Finch. This is a formal notice of legal action. We're filing for the total recovery of all misappropriated funds, plus interest. And, because of the nature of the fraud, using my identity to deceive Eleanor, I've also spoken to the state authorities. The documents are already in the hands of the district attorney. The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire's hands, usually so busy and precise, were shaking. She looked at the granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the physical manifestations of their theft, and she finally realized that the bill had come due. They had spent 2 decades believing that I was a child who would never grow up, never notice the numbers, and never question the system they had built. They hadn't counted on me becoming the one person who could read the ledger. As I turned to walk out of the kitchen, I paused in the doorway. Don't bother calling Eleanor. She already knows everything. She's the one who gave me the envelope. I walked out the front door and into the night air. The weight I had carried since childhood, the feeling that I was an extra in my own life, was gone. If you've been with me through this entire journey, thank you. This story is a testament to the fact that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, the truth is always stronger. Please, if you found value in this, subscribe to the channel and share this video. Your support helps us continue to bring these stories to light and fight for justice. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next investigation.